The Fox News studio burned under the lights as Donald Trump adjusted his glasses and leafed through, for the third time that afternoon, the folders that would transform the night into something memorable. These weren't ordinary documents. They were marriage certificates with official Minnesota seals, school records from Somalia with names circled in red, family photographs enlarged, until the childhood faces became unmistakable, tweets printed in giant font, congressional resolutions with vote tallies highlighted, campaign finance reports with totals underlined 3 times, and videos marked with precise timestamps. Each page represented a question no one had dared ask directly. Each document an accusation the mainstream media had buried under layers of ideological protection. Trump knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't a debate about foreign policy or economic theory. This was a public execution based on evidence, a systematic demolition of a narrative built on victimization and identity. He had spent weeks preparing this with private investigators, immigration attorneys, former federal prosecutors, and campaign finance experts. Every allegation needed to be irrefutable. Every document needed to be official. Every question needed to be formulated, so that refusing to answer would be as revealing as any confession. On the other side of the stage, Ilhan Omar waited with that expression her supporters called determination and her critics identified as arrogance. She wore the dark hijab that had become her trademark, an impeccable suit suggesting professional seriousness, and carried on her shoulders the confidence of someone who had won similar battles always using the same strategy: transform any criticism into bigotry, any question into racism, any investigation into Islamophobia. The tactic had worked magnificently for years. Journalists who tried to investigate her campaign finances were immediately accused of religious persecution. Politicians who questioned her statements about Israel were labeled intolerant. Progressive media protected her fiercely, treating any scrutiny as evidence of systemic prejudice. But Trump wasn't a cautious journalist trying to maintain appearances of neutrality. He wasn't a Democratic politician worried about reactions from his progressive base. He was someone who thrived in chaos, who transformed controversy into political fuel, and who showed not the slightest fear of being called racist, Islamophobic, or any other term critics might invent. He had faced worse accusations and emerged stronger. The victimhood shield Omar had used for years was about to shatter against someone immune to its magic. The studio was absurdly packed with 550 people crammed into a space designed for 300. Fox News had transformed the event into an unprecedented television spectacle, with giant high-definition screens strategically positioned to maximize the visual impact of each document Trump intended to display. The technical production was cinematic, with multiple cameras capturing every facial expression, every hesitant gesture, every moment of discomfort. Brett Baer, moderator chosen for his reputation for impartiality, occupied a central desk that looked more like a judge's throne than a mediator's position. He knew he was about to preside over something that would define his career, a confrontation so explosive that every word, every pause, every exchange would be analyzed for years. The audience composition told its own story. The overwhelming majority were Trump supporters who had traveled specifically to witness this moment, wearing red MAGA hats and Trump 2024 shirts, holding signs that read "Investigate Omar" and "America First," not Somalia First. They had waited hours outside in cold February, whether for the chance to be inside when Trump confronted someone they viewed as embodying everything wrong with progressive politics: alleged immigration fraud, minimization of terrorism, anti-Semitism, financial corruption, and questionable loyalty to America. Their anticipation was electric, almost violent in its intensity. In a small cordon section sat Omar's supporters, perhaps 50 people looking profoundly uncomfortable in deeply hostile territory. They held signs defending her. "Islamophobia has no place here," and "Stop the hate against Muslim women." Some wore hijabs in solidarity. Others were progressive activists from Minneapolis who had made the trip to support their congresswoman. They knew they were outnumbered 10-1, surrounded by people who viewed their presence as defending the indefensible. The tension between the two groups was so thick that security had been tripled, with Fox News executives genuinely concerned about potential confrontations. Omar walked out first at exactly 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The reaction was immediate and deafening. Her small section erupted in cheers, chanting her name with desperate enthusiasm, trying to create the impression of significant support. But they were instantly drowned out by boos from the Trump crowd, a wall of sound so overwhelming that Omar visibly flinched. The booing lasted 47 seconds, measured later by analysts, a sustained expression of contempt that set the tone before a single word was spoken. She walked to her podium with her head held high, projecting defiance, but her hands gripped her notes with white knuckles. She had faced hostile audiences before, but never anything like this, never this level of organized opposition, never with someone as prepared and relentless as Trump waiting to systematically dismantle her defenses. She arranged her papers on the podium, took a sip of water, and looked out at the crowd with an expression that mixed determination with barely concealed anxiety. In her mind, she rehearsed the strategy her advisors had drilled into her for weeks: pivot to identity when pressed on facts, invoke Islamophobia when confronted with evidence, appeal to progressive values when documents became overwhelming, and above all, never directly answer questions about her brother, her marriages, or her loyalty. The strategy had worked before. It had to work now. 2 minutes later, Donald Trump emerged from backstage to a roar that seemed to shake the building's foundation. The applause, cheers, and chants created a sound wave that the audio engineers later described as nearly overloading their equipment. Trump, 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 mixed with USA, 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 and lock her up. In a cacophony of support that lasted over 4 minutes, Bret Baier repeatedly asked for quiet, his voice barely audible over the sustained ovation. Trump waved with those distinctive sweeping gestures, pointing at people in the crowd, flashing thumbs up, soaking in the adulation with the practiced ease of someone who had done this thousands of times. He wore his signature dark suit and red tie, the uniform that had become iconic, and carried multiple thick folders which he placed on his podium with deliberate theatrical heaviness. The sound of those folders hitting the podium echoed through the brief moment of relative quiet, a promise of what was coming. Trump looked across at Omar, and for just a moment their eyes met. He smiled, not warmly but with the expression of a predator who had cornered prey. She tried to maintain her defiant look, but something in her eyes betrayed fear. Trump with prepared evidence was never good news for his targets. The crowd finally settled after Bret Baier's fifth request for order. The moderator looked between Trump and Omar, took a deep breath, and began his carefully prepared introduction. His voice carried the weight of someone who understood the historical significance of what was about to unfold. Good evening. Tonight we are here for what may be the most consequential political confrontation in modern congressional history. President Trump has requested this opportunity to directly question Congresswoman Ilhan Omar about serious allegations that have surrounded her career. These allegations include potential immigration fraud through marriage, questionable campaign finance practices, controversial statements about terrorism and 9/11, documented anti-Semitism condemned by her own party, and questions about her loyalty to the United States. Congresswoman Omar has agreed to address these matters directly. The format will be straightforward: opening statements, followed by direct questioning, followed by closing statements. I ask both participants and the audience to maintain decorum and allow this discussion to proceed based on facts and evidence. That reminder about decorum would last approximately 90 seconds. Bret Baier turned to Omar first, following the agreed-upon format. Congresswoman Omar, your opening statement. Omar began in her distinctive accent, the cadence that some found charming and others grating, immediately going on offense rather than defense. She had decided, against some advisors' counsel, to attack first, to establish moral authority before Trump could seize it. Thank you, Bret. I am here tonight because certain people refuse to accept that a Muslim refugee woman can be in Congress. Her voice was strong, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. The allegations against me are lies spread by Islamophobes and racists who cannot accept that someone like me, a black Muslim woman, can represent Americans. They cannot accept that I came to this country as a refugee and rose to Congress through hard work and the support of my constituents who believe in my vision for America. She turned to face Trump directly, her expression hardening. President Trump has spent years demonizing Muslims, refugees, and immigrants. He has spread lies about me because I dare to speak truth to power, because I dare to criticize policies I believe harm Americans, because I dare to represent a district that believes in justice and equality. But I will not be silenced by racism and bigotry. I will not be intimidated by false accusations. I will continue to serve my constituents and fight for the values that make America truly great: inclusion, justice, and equality for all. Her supporters applauded enthusiastically, trying to create momentum. She sat back, thinking she had established the moral high ground, that she had framed the debate as bigotry versus justice. Trump looked at her with something between contempt and anticipation, the look of someone who had heard this script before and had prepared a devastating response. When Brett Baier nodded to Trump for his opening statement, Trump didn't stand immediately. He let the silence build, let anticipation grow, understanding that timing was everything. When he finally stood, his queen's accent was thick with sarcasm, each word calculated for maximum impact. "Ilhan, can I call you Ilhan? Great. Let's talk about immigration fraud, specifically yours." The audience erupted immediately, forcing Brett Baier to call for order. Trump waited patiently, that slight smile never leaving his face. When the crowd settled, he opened his first folder with the care of someone unveiling evidence in a courtroom. When you build your career on immigration sob stories, you better not have committed immigration fraud yourself. When you cry about how America treats refugees, you better not have exploited the system that gave you everything. When you lecture us about immigration policy, you better not have broken immigration law. He pulled out the first document, a marriage certificate that appeared on the giant screens in crystal clarity, every detail visible to everyone in the studio and millions watching at home. The official seal of Minnesota, the signatures, the date, all unmistakable and undeniable. You came to America as a refugee from Somalia in 1995. Correct. Omar tried to control the narrative, knowing where this was heading. My family fled violence and... I asked a simple question, Trump interrupted, his voice sharp. You came here as a refugee, yes or no? Yes. America gave you safety, opportunity, citizenship, even elected you to Congress. Correct. Yes. Good. Now, let's talk about Ahmed Nursid Elmi. Omar's face went pale. Despite all the preparation, despite knowing this was coming, hearing that name spoken with such deliberate emphasis on national television sent a chill through her. She knew exactly where this was going, knew she was about to face the question she had dodged for years, and knew she still had no good answer. Trump displayed the marriage certificate on the screens, the image so large that people in the back row could read every word. Ilhan Omar married Ahmed Nursid Elmi, February 12, 2009, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Official marriage certificate, public record, undeniable fact. You married Ahmed Elmi in February 2009. Yes or no? Omar's attorneys had prepped her extensively for this moment. Never confirm details. Always pivot to the broader narrative. Make them prove everything. My personal marital history is... Yes or no? Trump's voice boomed through the studio, cutting her off with the force of someone who wouldn't accept deflection. Did you marry Ahmed Nursid Elmi in February 2009? It's a public record. I'm holding the certificate. The audience can see it on the screens. Yes or no? She couldn't deny a public marriage record that Trump was literally displaying. Yes. Thank you. Now who is Ahmed Nursid Elmi? He was someone I was married to. Is he your brother? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. The studio went completely silent. 550 people stopped breathing. Millions watching at home leaned forward. This was the moment everyone had waited for, the question no journalist had dared ask so directly, the allegation that had swirled for years but never been confronted with such brutal directness on national television. Omar's face flushed red, her hands gripped the podium. That is a disgusting smear. I didn't ask if it's a smear, Trump said, his tone almost conversational now, which somehow made it more menacing. I asked if he's your brother. Simple question. Yes or no. I will not dignify. That's not a denial. Trump's interruption was immediate. Is he your brother? You can end this right now. Just say no, he's not my brother. 5 words, say it. Omar refused to answer directly, instead launching into a prepared speech about Islamophobia and conspiracy theories. Trump let her talk for about 15 seconds, then cut her off with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. Let me show you why people think he's your brother. Let me show you why this question won't go away. Let me show you the evidence that you've never adequately explained. He displayed photographs on the screens. Young Omar and Elmi as children, clearly in the same household, the same family setting. The images were enlarged to enormous size, making every detail visible. They showed 2 children who looked remarkably similar, in the same home, wearing matching traditional Somali clothing, photographed in ways that clearly indicated family relationships. These are photos from Somalia. You and Elmi as children, same house, same family, look like brother and sister to you. Before she could respond, he pulled out more evidence, building his case with the methodical precision of a prosecutor who had spent months preparing for trial. School records from Somalia listing both of you with the same parents, same mother, same father. Both of your names on school enrollment documents with identical parent information. The documents appeared on screen, highlighted sections showing matching parent names in yellow, making them impossible to miss. Trump walked toward center stage as he continued, physically dominating the space. Social media posts from family members before they were deleted, calling Elmi your brother. Your own family members calling him your brother on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All deleted once the allegations surfaced. But the internet is forever, Ilhan. Screenshots exist. He showed archived social media screenshots with the word brother highlighted in bright red. Posts from accounts belonging to alleged relatives, casual references to Ilhan's brother Ahmed, birthday wishes, family photos with captions that clearly indicated sibling relationships. Each screenshot was timestamped, showing they predated the controversy. Trump walked toward her podium now, building his case, his voice rising with each point. Let me explain what investigators believe happened, because the evidence is pretty clear. The pattern is obvious once you see it all laid out. He displayed a timeline on the screens, each date appearing with corresponding evidence. 2002, Ahmed Nur said Elmi comes to America, needs immigration status, wants to stay permanently, needs a path to citizenship. 2009, you marry him. You're already a U.S. citizen at this point. Marriage to a citizen provides the fastest path to permanent residency. 2009 to 2017, he gets green card, path to citizenship through marriage to you. Lives in America legally based on your marriage. 2012 to 2015, you file joint tax returns with Ahmed Hiasi while still legally married to Elmi. 2 husbands at the same time for tax purposes. That's tax fraud, by the way. 2017, you divorce Elmi after he's established immigration status. Mission accomplished. He has his residency secured. 2018, you legally marry Hiasi, who you'd been with all along, who fathered your children, who was always your actual partner. Trump turned back to face her directly, his expression one of disgust. That's immigration fraud. Marrying someone to get them a green card. That's a federal crime. 5 years in prison, that's what you did. Omar tried to interrupt, but Trump spoke over her with the confidence of someone who had more evidence to present. And here's the kicker. While you were legally married to Elmi, you were filing joint tax returns with Ahmed Hiasi. 2 husbands at the same time for tax purposes. How does that work, Ilhan? Were you married to 2 men simultaneously? Did you forget which husband you were supposed to file taxes with? He displayed the tax filing records. Official documents from the IRS and Minnesota Department of Revenue showing joint filings with Hiasi during years she was legally married to Elmi. Minnesota Campaign Finance Board fined you $3,469 for violations related to this. You paid the fine. That's admission. That's you acknowledging you did something wrong. Why did you pay the fine if everything was legitimate? He showed the fine documentation, the official letter from the Campaign Finance Board detailing the violations, and the payment record showing Omar had paid rather than fight it. Trump turned back to face her directly, preparing for his final assault on this topic. So let me ask you again, very directly, on national television with millions watching, is Ahmed Nursaid Elmi your brother? Omar refused to answer, repeating her claims about Islamophobia, about conspiracy theories, about racist smears. Her voice was rising now, taking on a defensive edge that everyone could hear. Your silence speaks volumes, Trump said, his tone almost pitying now. If he's not your brother, just say so. If these school records are wrong, explain how. If these family photos aren't what they look like, clarify. If your family members calling him your brother on social media were mistaken, tell us why. But you won't, because you can't. Trump's voice rose to a shout, pointing directly at her. You came here as a refugee. America gave you everything. Safety from Somalia's chaos, citizenship, opportunity, education, healthcare, welfare support when you needed it. You became a United States Congresswoman, the American dream realized. He paused for effect, letting the contrast build. And you possibly committed immigration fraud to bring your brother here. You possibly lied to get him status. You possibly broke federal law. You possibly made a mockery of the immigration system that saved your life. And now you refuse to answer basic questions about it and call everyone who asks a racist. His final line was delivered with maximum force, each word emphasized. That's not Islamophobia. That's evidence you refuse to address. That's questions you won't answer. That's documents you can't explain. If you're innocent, prove it. Show us different school records, provide DNA tests, explain the family photos, but you won't. And we all know why. The audience erupted with the force of a dam breaking. Lock her up, filled the studio, the chant so loud that it took Brett Baier nearly 2 full minutes to restore any semblance of order. Trump stood at his podium looking satisfied, having landed the first devastating blow. Omar sat pale and shaken, having confronted the question she had avoided for years and having no good answer to offer. The studio monitors showed social media already exploding. Did she marry her brother? Was trending worldwide within 60 seconds of Trump asking the question. Clips were being shared millions of times while the debate was still happening. This was already becoming one of the most viral political moments in history. Trump grabbed his next folder immediately, not giving Omar any time to recover, not allowing her to regroup or mount a defense. He had her reeling, and he intended to keep her there. Now let's talk about 9/11, because you said something about it that I'll never forget, and I was there. I was in New York City on September 11, 2001. I watched the towers fall. I went to ground zero. I saw the devastation. I knew people who died. So when you talk about 9/11, I take it personally. He queued up video on the screens, the clip that had haunted Omar's career since 2019. Never minimize mass murder in front of a New Yorker who watched the towers fall. Never trivialize the worst terrorist attack on American soil. Never reduce the deaths of nearly 3,000 Americans to a casual phrase. The video played. Omar speaking at a CAIR event in Los Angeles, March 23, 2019. Her voice clear and unmistakable. CAIR was founded after 9/11. Because they recognized that some people did something, and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Trump let the clip end, then turned to the audience with exaggerated disbelief, playing to the cameras. Some people did something. That's how she described 9/11. Some people did something. He pulled out printed lists, holding them up for the cameras. Let me tell you what some people did. They hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. They murdered 2,977 Americans. They flew planes into the Twin Towers in my city. They hit the Pentagon. They would have hit the Capitol if brave passengers on Flight 93 hadn't fought back and crashed the plane in Pennsylvania, sacrificing themselves to save others. Trump's voice became harder, taking on an edge of genuine anger. I watched those towers fall. I went to ground zero. I saw the devastation. I saw the smoke rising for weeks. I saw the missing person posters covering every surface. I saw the funerals. I saw the families destroyed. I knew people who died. This wasn't some people did something. This was the worst terrorist attack on American soil in history. He displayed photos on the screens, images that still had the power to shock 2 decades later. The burning towers, people jumping from windows to escape the flames, the collapse, the dust cloud engulfing lower Manhattan, the aftermath. Each image appeared for several seconds, forcing everyone to confront the reality Omar had minimized. These are the people who did something, Ilhan. Regular Americans going to work, office workers answering phones, filing papers, having morning meetings, first responders who ran toward danger, firefighters who charged into collapsing buildings knowing they might not come out, police officers trying to evacuate people, regular people just trying to survive the worst day of their lives. He pulled out the list of names again, the complete roster of 9/11 victims, 2,977 names printed in small font to fit them all. He began reading, his voice steady but filled with emotion. Gordon M. Amoth Jr., Edelmiro Abad, Maria Rose Abad, Andrew Anthony Abate, Vincent Paul Abate, Lawrence Abel, William F. Abrahamson, Richard Anthony Aceto, Jesus Acevedo Riscatter, Heinrich Bernhard Ackerman. He read 20 names, then stopped. These are just the first names alphabetically. 20 out of 2,977. Every one of them a real person. Everyone with family, friends, dreams, plans for the future. Everyone murdered by terrorists. Trump walked toward her podium, the list of names held prominently. And you called it "some people did something." Like it was a fender bender. Like it was a parking violation. Like it was an unfortunate incident we should just move past. Some people did something. Omar tried to defend herself, her voice shaking slightly now. That comment was taken out of context. I was speaking about. There is no context that makes that okay. Trump shouted, genuine anger breaking through his usually controlled performance. You can't properly honor 2,977 murdered Americans. You can't call it what it was. Terrorism. Islamic terrorism. Al-Qaeda terrorists declaring war on America and murdering thousands of innocent people. He showed more of her statement, playing a longer clip to show the full context she claimed would exonerate her. It didn't help. In full context, she was still minimizing 9/11 to make a point about Muslim civil rights, still reducing mass murder to "some people did something." And you didn't apologize, Trump continued, his voice dripping with contempt. When people got angry about this, when 9/11 families expressed hurt and outrage, when even some of your Democratic colleagues criticized you, you didn't apologize. You said people were misunderstanding you. You said your words were being twisted. You doubled down on it. You defended it. You made yourself the victim. Trump's voice became louder, more forceful. America gave you refuge when Somalia failed you, gave you safety when you were fleeing violence, gave you citizenship, gave you opportunity, elected you to Congress, and you can't even properly honor Americans murdered on September 11th. You minimize their deaths as "some people did something." You reduce the worst attack on our nation to a casual phrase you use to score political points. Shook his head in disgust, a gesture of profound disappointment. I was in New York on September 11th. I saw the smoke from Trump Tower. I heard the sirens, endless sirens. I watched the towers collapse on TV like everyone else, but I was there in the city. I smelled the smoke for weeks. I saw the devastation. Those weren't some people doing something. Those were Al-Qaeda terrorists murdering Americans in an act of war. That was evil attacking innocents. That was hatred destroying lives. His final assessment was brutal, delivered with maximum contempt. You came to America from a country that couldn't protect you. America protected you. America gave you everything. And you show such contempt for American victims that you can't even describe their murder accurately. You minimize 9/11 to make a point about Muslim civil rights. You reduce American deaths to "some people did something" so you can talk about Islamophobia. He pointed at her accusingly. That's not cultural difference. That's not misunderstanding. That's disrespect. That's contempt. That's proof you don't understand or appreciate what America gave you, and it's disqualifying for someone who swore an oath to represent Americans. The audience erupted again. The chanting was deafening. Some people did something. Some people did something, being shouted back at her in mockery. Trump let it continue for nearly a minute before Bret Baier could restore order. Social media exploded even further. Some people did something was now trending globally alongside. Did she marry her brother? Clips of Trump reading the names of 9/11 victims while Omar sat silently were being shared millions of times. 9/11 families were responding on Twitter, thanking Trump for defending their loved ones' memories. The emotional impact was overwhelming. Trump moved immediately to his next attack, pulling out printed tweets, giving Omar no respite, no chance to recover from the previous onslaught. Now let's talk about your problem with Jews. And don't start with the criticism of Israel defense. We're not talking about Israeli policy. We're talking about anti-Semitism. Classic, textbook, Nazi propaganda-level anti-Semitism. He paused for dramatic effect. When even Democrats condemn your anti-Semitism twice, you know it's bad. When your own party is so embarrassed they pass resolutions against you, that tells you something. Trump displayed her tweets on the screens one by one, each appearing in enormous font, impossible to miss or misinterpret. February 2019. Someone asks you about pro-Israel support in Congress. You tweet, "It's all about the Benjamin's baby." He showed the tweet with the money bag emoji prominently displayed. You're saying Jews buy political support. That Jews control politics with money. That's a classic anti-Semitic trope, Ilhan. Jews secretly controlling things with money. That's literally Nazi propaganda. That's from the protocols of the elders of Zion. That's blood libel updated for the 21st century. Omar tried to interrupt. I was talking about AIPAC and you said it's all about the Benjamins. Trump cut her off sharply. About money. About Jews using money to control politics. That's anti-Semitism. That's saying Jews have divided loyalties, that Jews control America with cash, that Jews manipulate politics through financial power. How is that not anti-Semitic? He pulled out another tweet before she could answer, building momentum. November 2012. You tweeted, "Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel." Trump read it slowly, letting each word land with full impact, making sure everyone heard it clearly. Hypnotized the world. Another classic anti-Semitic trope. Jews have mystical powers. Jews hypnotize people. Jews cast spells to control Gentiles. That's literally from medieval blood libels. That's from the protocols of the elders of Zion, one of the most anti-Semitic texts ever written, the text that helped inspire the Holocaust. He displayed more tweets, a montage of Omar's statements comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, apartheid South Africa, and other oppressive regimes. Each tweet appeared with date stamps, showing this wasn't a one-time error but a pattern spanning years. You compared Israel to Nazi Germany. You compared Jews, the victims of the Holocaust, to their own murderers. 6 million Jews were exterminated by the Nazis. 6 million. Men, women, children, entire families erased from existence. And you compare the Jewish state to the regime that tried to exterminate all Jews. How dare you? Trump pulled out official congressional documents, holding them up dramatically. And you know what happened? Your own party was so embarrassed they passed a resolution. H-Raise 183, March 2019. The House of Representatives passed a resolution condemning anti-Semitism because of your tweets. Your own Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, they condemned you publicly. They were so embarrassed by your Jew hatred that they had to pass an official resolution. He showed the resolution on screen, the full text with the vote tally. 473 in favor, a bipartisan condemnation of her statements. Your own party condemned you. Think about that. Democrats protecting you, but they couldn't protect you from this. They had to publicly rebuke you because what you said was so obviously anti-Semitic. He wasn't done. He pulled out another document. And then it happened again. H-Raise 489, July 2019. Another resolution. Your own party condemned you twice for anti-Semitism within 4 months. The evidence appeared on screen, both resolutions side by side with vote tallies showing overwhelming bipartisan support for condemning her statements. Trump walked toward her podium, his voice filled with contempt. Let me explain something to you. Jews fled persecution and came to America just like you fled Somalia. They escaped pogroms, they escaped the Holocaust, they escaped persecution in Arab countries. America gave them safety and opportunity just like it gave you safety and opportunity. They built lives, contributed to society, became successful through hard work, just like you're supposed to do. His voice became harder, more accusatory. And you spread anti-Semitic tropes about them. You say they control politics with money. You say they hypnotize the world. You compare them to Nazis, to the very people who tried to exterminate them. You side with their enemies. You support movements that want to destroy the only Jewish state in the world. He pointed at the screens showing her tweets. That's not criticism of Israeli policy. That's Jew hatred. That's anti-Semitism. And your own party knows it. That's why they condemned you twice. That's why even Democrats who agree with you on other issues had to publicly rebuke you. Trump pulled out her voting record, another thick stack of documents. You voted against Iron Dome funding. That's the defensive system that protects Israeli civilians from Hamas rockets. Defensive system, Ilhan. It intercepts rockets fired at civilians, at schools, at hospitals, at homes. And you voted no. You voted against defending civilians from terrorists. He showed her no, votes on several Israel-related bills, highlighting how isolated she was even among progressive Democrats on these votes. You support BDS, boycott, divest, sanction, targeting the only democracy in the Middle East, targeting the only country in that region where Arabs can vote, where women have rights, where religious minorities are protected. You side with Hamas, with Hezbollah, with Iranian proxies, with terrorist organizations over the only free country in the region. Trump's voice rose to a crescendo. You're the most anti-Semitic member of Congress. Your own Democrats have condemned you for it twice. You spread hatred against Jews while America protects you, while America gave you everything Somalia couldn't give you. His final line was devastating, delivered with maximum force. Jews came to America seeking refuge from hatred just like you did. They fled persecution just like you did. They came here for safety and opportunity just like you did. And you brought the hatred with you. You spread anti-Semitism while America protects you. That's not just wrong. That's evil. The audience reaction was explosive. Chants of condemn Omar, mixed with anti-Semite, anti-Semite. The Jewish members of the audience, several wearing yarmulkes, stood and applauded with tears in their eyes. Holocaust survivors groups would later release statements thanking Trump for defending their community. Online, Jewish organizations that had tried to give Omar the benefit of the doubt were now issuing statements acknowledging Trump's points. The Anti-Defamation League, which had been cautious about criticizing her, released a statement during the debate saying her tweets were clearly anti-Semitic, and the House condemnations were appropriate and necessary. Omar sat at her podium looking devastated. Each attack had been worse than the last. The brother marriage allegations, the 9/11 minimization, now the anti-Semitism. And Trump had more evidence, more folders, more devastating attacks to come. Trump grabbed another folder marked campaign finance, moving seamlessly to his next assault. Let's talk about money. Specifically, campaign money you paid to your husband's company. Because paying your husband millions in campaign cash while having an affair with him, that's corruption. That's using donor money to enrich your family. That's theft dressed up as consulting fees. He opened the folder with practiced theatrical flair. You married Tim Minett, correct? Omar nodded wearily, knowing where this was going, dreading it. His company is E Street Group, a political consulting firm, correct? Yes. And since 2018, your campaign has paid his company approximately $2.8 million. Is that accurate? Omar tried to explain, speaking about legitimate campaign expenditures for necessary services. Trump cut her off. $2.8 million to your husband's company. Let me break that down for everyone. He displayed the payments on screen in brutal detail. E-Street Group payments from Omar for Congress. Travel, $780,000. Consulting, $1,200,000. Media production, $650,000. Digital services, $370,000. Total, $2,800,000. But here's where it gets really interesting, Trump said with a knowing smile, pulling out court documents. Before Tim Minett was your husband, he was married to Bate Minett. And when she filed for divorce in August 2019, do you know what she said in her divorce filing? He displayed the divorce filing on screen, highlighting a specific explosive section. Defendant's more recent travel and long work hours now appear to be more related to his affair with Representative Ilhan Omar. Trump read it aloud slowly, savoring each word. His ex-wife said you were having an affair with him while he was married, while you were married to someone else, while he was working for your campaign, while getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by your campaign, an affair documented in divorce court. The audience booed loudly, the disgust palpable. So let me get this timeline straight, Trump continued, pulling out a detailed chart that appeared on the screens. Let me show everyone exactly what happened here, because the pattern is clear once you see it laid out. The timeline appeared with dates and corresponding evidence. 2018, Tim Minett starts working for your campaign through E-Street Group. You're married to Ahmed Hiasi at this time. 2019, you start an affair with Tim while both of you are married to other people. His wife later testifies to this in divorce proceedings. 2019, your campaign is paying Tim's company hundreds of thousands of dollars, money flowing from campaign to your boyfriend. 2019, Tim's wife Bate files for divorce, specifically citing your affair in court documents. 2019, you divorce Hiasi amid growing scandal about the affair. 2020, you marry Tim just months after both your divorces are finalized. 2020 to present, your campaign continues paying his company, now over $2.8 million total, paying your husband millions. Trump shook his head in exaggerated disbelief. That's not campaign finance. That's a family business funded by political donors. You're funneling campaign money to your husband's company. You're enriching your household with money people donated to elect you to Congress. That's corruption. He pulled out the Minnesota fine documentation with a flourish. And the Minnesota Campaign Finance Board fined you $3,469 for violations related to this. The largest fine ever levied against a House member at that time for campaign finance violations. You paid it. You admitted wrongdoing by paying rather than fighting it. Omar tried to defend herself. The fine was for technical. Technical? Trump shouted, cutting her off. You paid your boyfriend's company hundreds of thousands while having an affair with him. Then you married him and kept paying him millions. There's nothing technical about that. That's corruption. That's using campaign funds for personal benefit. That's enriching your family with donor money. Trump pulled out FEC complaints, thick stacks of official documents. Multiple Federal Election Commission complaints have been filed against you alleging personal use of campaign funds, alleging you're enriching your family, alleging violations of campaign finance law. And the evidence is right here, $2.8 million to your husband's company. He pointed at the payment records on screen, the numbers impossible to deny. That's not legitimate consulting services. That's not arm's-length transactions. That's transferring campaign donations to your household income. That's making your family rich off money people donated to your campaign. His final line was delivered with maximum contempt. You came to America with nothing. Refugee from Somalia. Now you're worth millions. How? By funneling campaign money to your husband. By using political donations as a family piggy bank. That's not public service. That's theft from donors who thought they were supporting your campaign. That's corruption, plain and simple. The evidence was overwhelming. The affair documented in divorce proceedings. The millions in payments to the husband's company. The Minnesota fine she had paid. Even Democrats watching couldn't deny it looked terrible. Online, campaign finance experts were tweeting in real time. many saying Trump had presented a compelling case of potential campaign finance violations that deserved investigation. Even some progressive commentators admitted the payments looked inappropriate regardless of whether they were technically legal. Trump pulled out video footage with visible anticipation, a slight smile playing on his lips that suggested he had saved something particularly devastating for this moment. Now let's talk about loyalty. Specifically, your loyalty or complete lack thereof. Let's talk about which country you actually represent, because sometimes it seems confused. He queued up video on the screens. When you go to Somalia and tell Somalis to ask you what country you're from, the answer better be America. You're a United States Congresswoman. You represent Minnesota's 5th District. You swore an oath to America. So which country are you from, Ilhan? The video began playing. Omar in Mogadishu, August 2022, addressing a large crowd, speaking passionately in Somali. The translation appeared in subtitles on the massive screens. Ask us what country we are from. Ask us what representation means to us. Ask us what we are doing with the power we have been given. Trump paused the video, his expression one of exaggerated confusion. Ask us what country we are from. Not I'm an American. Not I represent America in Congress. Not I'm honored to serve the United States. But ask us what country we're from with the clear implication that the answer might not be America. He turned to face her directly. So I'm asking, what country are you from? Omar bristled, defensive anger flashing across her face. I'm an American citizen representing. Then why didn't you just say that? Trump interrupted sharply. Why did you tell Somalis in Somalia to ask you? What's the answer supposed to be? What did you want them to think? He didn't wait for her response, immediately playing more of the speech. More footage of Omar discussing Somali interests, Somali politics, Somali needs, all in Somali, all to Somali crowds, all with the passion of someone advocating for her true country of allegiance. You're in Somalia, promoting Somalia's interests, speaking Somali to Somalis, acting as Somalia's representative, not Minnesota's, not America's, Somalia's. You're there as their advocate, their voice, their representative to America. Trump pulled out the congressional oath of office, reading it slowly and deliberately. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. He looked up at her, emphasizing each word. Allegiance to the United States, not to Somalia, not to any other country, to America. That's what you swore. But in Somalia, you can't clearly say you're American. You tell them to ask what country you're from. You promote their interests. You act as their representative in the U.S. Congress. Trump walked toward her podium, building his case. You've opposed American foreign policy repeatedly. You side with countries that oppose us. You vote against American interests. You minimize American tragedies. You spread hatred of American allies. You seem more concerned about Somalia than about America. He pulled out more evidence, listing her votes and statements. 9/11, some people did something, minimizing American deaths. Israel, constant attacks, anti-Semitism, opposition to our closest Middle East ally. Immigration, oppose all enforcement, calling ICE terrorists, comparing detention to concentration camps. National security, vote against defense measures, against counterterrorism efforts, against sanctions on hostile nations. Somalia speech, can't clearly state you're American when asked directly. Trump's voice rose, genuine anger breaking through again. Where is your loyalty? You took an oath to America, but you act like you represent Somalia. You defend Somalia's interests. You speak to Somalis as one of them, not as an American. You seem confused about which country you actually serve. His final line was delivered with devastating force. America saved you from Somalia, gave you everything Somalia couldn't give you. Safety, food, education, healthcare, citizenship, opportunity, the right to vote, the ability to run for Congress. Somalia failed you. America succeeded. And you go back there and won't even clearly say you're American. Maybe you're in the wrong country. Maybe you should represent Somalia in Somalia's parliament instead of representing Minnesota in America's Congress. The audience erupted. Go back to Somalia. Go back to Somalia, filled the studio. The chant politically incorrect but emotionally honest, expressing frustration that many Americans felt but couldn't articulate. Online, the Somalia speech clip went massively viral. Conservative accounts were sharing it with captions like, "She won't say she's American," and "Somalia first, America second." Even moderate Democrats were tweeting concerns about the optics, about how the speech looked to average Americans. Trump grabbed his final prepared folder, saving one more devastating attack. One more thing before we wrap this up. Your disturbing habit of downplaying terrorism, of minimizing terrorist organizations, of treating America's enemies like they're misunderstood victims instead of murderous terrorists. He pulled up interview footage, looking almost gleeful now, making air quotes about terrorists who killed Americans. That's disqualifying. That shows you're not fit to serve in Congress, not fit to have security clearances, not fit to represent Americans. The video played. Omar in an interview, the professor discussing his class, mentioning Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. As he said each name, Omar made exaggerated air quote gestures with her fingers, a mocking expression on her face, clearly indicating skepticism about calling these groups terrorists. Trump replayed it 3 times, making sure everyone saw it clearly. You made air quotes about Al-Qaeda, about Hezbollah, like they're not really terrorist groups, like calling them terrorists is somehow propaganda or exaggeration, like it's a joke. He pulled out casualty numbers, statistics printed in large font. Al-Qaeda, responsible for 9/11, 2,977 Americans murdered, worst terrorist attack in American history. Founded by Osama bin Laden with the explicit goal of attacking America. Hezbollah killed 241 U.S. Marines in Beirut in 1983, bombed the Marine barracks, Americans sleeping, murdered by a truck bomb, designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S. government and most Western nations. Trump looked at her with undisguised disgust. And you make air quotes, you mock calling them terrorists. You treat designating terrorist organizations as somehow controversial or questionable. He pulled out more evidence, building his final case. This fits a pattern. You minimize 9/11 as some people did something. You make air quotes about Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah. You oppose anti-terrorism measures. You vote against designating groups as terrorists. You seem sympathetic to America's enemies. He listed examples rapidly, each one appearing on screen. Voted against designating the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. Opposed sanctions on terrorism-supporting countries like Iran. Defended Taliban and other Islamist groups as having legitimate grievances. Made excuses for Islamic extremism, blaming American foreign policy. Constantly oppose American counterterrorism efforts as Islamophobic. Trump's voice became harder, more accusatory. You took an oath to defend America against enemies, foreign and domestic. But you can't even simply state that Al-Qaeda is a terrorist organization without air quotes and mockery. You can't acknowledge that groups that murder Americans are evil. You seem more sympathetic to terrorists than to their victims. He looked directly at the cameras, speaking to the American people watching. For someone in Congress, someone with security clearances, someone responsible for American security policy, this is disqualifying. You minimize terrorism. You mock designating terrorists. You oppose fighting them. You make excuses for them. His final line was simple but devastating. Whose side are you on? The question hung in the air, unanswerable and damning. The audience sat in stunned silence for a moment before erupting into the loudest reaction yet. Trump stood and walked to center stage, leaving all his folders of evidence behind on his podium as physical proof of everything he had presented. He looked at Omar, then at the cameras, then began his comprehensive final statement. Ilhan, let me summarize what we've established tonight, because I think America needs to understand who you really are, what you represent, and why you're unfit to serve in Congress. He began methodically, building his case point by point. You came to America in 1995 as a refugee from Somalia. Your country was in chaos, civil war, violence, starvation, complete societal collapse. Somalia couldn't protect you, couldn't feed you, couldn't give you a future. America gave you safety when Somalia couldn't protect you. America gave you everything. He paused, letting that sink in. You possibly married your brother to commit immigration fraud. We have the marriage certificate showing you married Ahmed Nur, said Elmi in 2009. We have family photos showing you as children together in the same household. We have school records from Somalia listing the same parents for both of you. We have social media posts from family members calling him your brother before those posts were deleted. We have tax records showing you filed jointly with Ahmed Hiasi while legally married to Elmi. We have the $3,469 fine you paid to Minnesota's Campaign Finance Board. And when I asked you directly if he's your brother, you refused to deny it. You wouldn't say, no, he's not my brother, because you can't. Because the evidence suggests he is, and you committed immigration fraud to get him status. Trump's voice rose with each point, building momentum. You minimized 9/11, the worst attack on American soil, as some people did something. 2,977 Americans murdered in my city, in the Pentagon, in that Pennsylvania field. Thousands of families destroyed. Thousands of children who lost parents. Thousands of parents who lost children. And you can't properly honor them. You trivialize their deaths to make a political point about Muslim civil rights. That's not cultural sensitivity. That's contempt for America. That's disrespect for American victims of terrorism. He continued, his voice harder now. You spread anti-Semitic tropes so disgusting that your own party condemned you twice. It's all about the Benjamins. Israel has hypnotized the world, comparing Jews to Nazis. Your own Democrats were so embarrassed they passed 2 separate resolutions against you within 4 months. 2 resolutions. Your own party. That's how bad your Jew hatred is. That's how obvious your anti-Semitism is. Trump paced across the stage, physical energy, matching his verbal assault. You funneled $2.8 million in campaign money to your husband's company. You had an affair with him while both of you were married to other people, documented in his divorce proceedings. You married him right after your divorces. You've paid his company millions in donor money. You got fined the largest amount ever for a House member for campaign finance violations. That's pure corruption. That's using donor money to enrich your family. That's treating your campaign as a personal bank account. He pointed at her accusingly. You went to Somalia and told crowds to ask you what country you're from. You promoted Somalia's interests like you're their representative, not America's. You couldn't clearly state you're American when given the perfect opportunity. You act as Somalia's advocate in the U.S. Congress. You seem confused about which country you actually represent. You put Somalia's interests ahead of America's interests. Trump's voice became harder, angrier, more forceful. You made air quotes about Al-Qaeda, the organization that murdered 2,977 Americans. You minimize terrorism. You oppose counterterrorism measures. You vote against American interests repeatedly. You side with America's enemies. You defend terrorist organizations. You make excuses for Islamic extremism. You treat America's security efforts as the real problem. He walked toward her podium for his final comprehensive statement, his voice rising to a crescendo. America gave you everything: safety from Somalia's chaos, safety from civil war and starvation, citizenship when you had nothing, opportunity that Somalia could never provide, education, health care, welfare support, the right to vote, the ability to run for office. You became a United States Congresswoman. A refugee from a failed state rose to Congress. That's the American dream realized. That's proof America works. His voice rose to a shout, genuine emotion breaking through. And how did you repay America? By possibly committing immigration fraud, by attacking America, by spreading anti-Semitism, by minimizing 9/11, by funneling campaign money to your husband, by acting as Somalia's representative, by sympathizing with terrorists, by undermining American interests, by showing more loyalty to Somalia than to the country that saved your life. Trump spread his arms to encompass the audience and cameras, delivering his final judgment. You took an oath. I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. You swore that oath. You promised allegiance to America. He pointed directly at her, his voice filled with contempt. But you've broken that oath. You've betrayed it. You've shown more loyalty to Somalia than to America, more sympathy for terrorists than for victims, more hatred for Jews than respect for allies, more interest in enriching yourself than serving constituents, more concern for your brother's immigration status than for American immigration law. His final line was delivered with maximum force, each word emphasized. America saved you from Somalia. America gave you everything Somalia couldn't, and you've spent your time in Congress attacking America, undermining America, enriching yourself, spreading hatred and promoting Somalia. That's not representation. That's betrayal. Maybe Somalia needs you more than America does. Maybe you should go back and serve there instead of serving them from here. The audience erupted into the longest standing ovation of the night, over 5 minutes of sustained applause, cheering, and chanting. USA, 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 mixed with deport Omar, and investigate her now. The chanting was deafening, overwhelming, expressing years of pent-up frustration that Trump had finally articulated. Omar sat at her podium visibly shaken, near tears, unable to mount an effective defense. Every point Trump made was backed by evidence she couldn't deny. Marriage records, photos, school documents, congressional resolutions, campaign finance records, video footage of her own words. She had tried the Islamophobia defense, but it fell flat against documented evidence. She had tried claiming misunderstanding, but her own recorded statements contradicted her. She had tried deflecting to broader issues, but Trump kept pulling her back to specific questions she couldn't answer. She could only sit there as her pattern of alleged fraud, documented corruption, and anti-American behavior was exposed with receipts, with evidence, with her own words played back to her. The shield of victimhood that had protected her for years had finally shattered against someone who didn't care about being called racist, who had evidence instead of just accusations, who was immune to her defensive tactics. Brett Baier attempted to moderate a final exchange, but the damage was done. Omar's closing statement was weak, defensive, focusing on being victimized rather than addressing the evidence. Trump's closing statement was triumphant, calling for investigations into all the allegations he had presented and asking Americans to demand accountability. The video exploded across every platform with unprecedented velocity that media analysts would study for years. Within 2 hours, 34 million views across all platforms combined. Within 24 hours, 112 million views. Within 1 week, 182 million total views, making it one of the most-watched political confrontations ever recorded. The engagement metrics were staggering. 15 million shares, 8 million comments, trending in 147 countries simultaneously. Did she marry her brother? Became the #1 trending topic globally within minutes of Trump asking the question, and stayed there for 6 straight days, an almost unprecedented sustained trend. Some people did something, resurfaced and trended alongside it, with thousands of people sharing the clip of her original statement and Trump's response. Ilhan Omar immigration fraud trended. Omar anti-Semitism trended. $2.8 million husband trended. Somalia first trended. Every scandal Trump had exposed became a separate trending topic, each one generating millions of conversations. Conservative media went into absolute overdrive with coverage that dominated their programming for weeks. Fox News played the full debate 5 times in 48 hours, each airing drawing massive ratings. Sean Hannity dedicated an entire week to segments on each of Omar's scandals, bringing in immigration attorneys to explain how the brother marriage fraud would work, former FBI agents to discuss why it hadn't been properly investigated, and Minneapolis residents who had reported the allegations years ago but were ignored. Tucker Carlson did a special titled Immigration Fraud in Congress, the Omar Cover-Up, that became his most-watched episode ever with 7.2 million viewers. Laura and Graham brought on Bait Minute, Tim's ex-wife. for an interview about the affair and campaign payments that generated 4.8 million views. But the real story, the truly significant development, was what happened in mainstream media. Even outlets that had protected Omar for years, that had dismissed allegations against her as conspiracy theories, that had called investigations into her Islamophobic, couldn't completely ignore the evidence Trump had presented on national television. CNN was forced to address the brother marriage allegations seriously for the first time, bringing on legal experts who acknowledged the evidence was concerning and deserved thorough investigation. Jake Tapper did a segment examining the school records and family photos, concluding that, while not definitive proof, these documents raise legitimate questions that Congresswoman Omar has not adequately answered. Anderson Cooper interviewed immigration attorneys, who explained that if the allegations were true, it would constitute serious federal crimes carrying years in prison. MSNBC's panel, while trying to defend Omar and accuse Trump of racism, had to admit the school records and family photos were difficult to explain, and that her refusal to simply deny the allegations was problematic optics. Rachel Maddow, one of Omar's strongest defenders, did a segment acknowledging that some of these questions deserve answers, even while criticizing Trump's confrontational approach. Joy Reid was less diplomatic, calling it a racist attack, but even she had to acknowledge that the campaign finance issues with payments to her husband's company look bad regardless of legality. The New York Times, which had consistently dismissed the brother marriage allegations as debunked conspiracy theories, ran a piece titled "Omar Faces Renewed Questions About Past Marriages" that, while sympathetic to Omar, had to acknowledge that evidence existed and remained unexplained. The article detailed the school records, family photos, and social media posts, concluding that Representative Omar has not provided documentation to definitively refute these allegations. The Washington Post fact-checked Trump's claims in a piece that awkwardly rated several as unproven but based on documented evidence, because they couldn't verify the brother relationship definitively, but couldn't deny the suspicious documentation either. Their fact-checker wrote, "The evidence Trump presented raises serious questions. The school records, family photos, and social media posts are real. Omar's refusal to provide contradicting documentation or DNA evidence leaves these allegations unresolved rather than debunked." Polling showed dramatic shifts in public opinion, changes that political analysts considered remarkable given how polarized the electorate had become. Major polls conducted in the week following the debate showed, should Ilhan Omar be investigated for immigration fraud? Before debate, 41% yes, 32% no, 27% unsure. After debate, 73% yes, 15% no, 12% unsure. Did Omar's "some people did something" comment about 9/11 show disrespect for victims? Before debate, 52% yes. After debate, 81% yes. Is Omar's loyalty to America questionable? Before debate, 39% yes among all voters. After debate, 68% yes. Should campaign payments to spouses' company be illegal? Before debate, 58% yes. After debate, 79% yes. Even among Democrats, significant shifts occurred. Among Democratic voters, belief that Omar should be investigated rose from 18% to 41%. Among independents, it rose from 39% to 78%. The debate had clearly moved public opinion in Trump's direction. The FBI faced renewed pressure from multiple directions. Republican congressmen held a press conference 3 days after the debate demanding investigations into the marriage fraud allegations, citing all the evidence Trump had displayed. Jim Jordan, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, announced his committee would be holding hearings. Matt Gaetz introduced a resolution calling for Omar's expulsion from Congress pending investigation. 27 Republican senators signed a letter to the FBI director demanding action. Several Republican state attorneys general announced they were reviewing whether state charges could be brought for tax fraud related to the dual husband filings. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton said his office was examining whether Omar had committed crimes under Texas law during campaign events in his state. Florida's Attorney General made similar announcements. Jewish organizations that had been criticized by conservatives for being too tolerant of Omar's anti-Semitism became notably more vocal and critical. The Anti-Defamation League, which had tried to give her the benefit of the doubt for years, issued a statement saying, Representative Omar's tweets were clearly anti-Semitic. The House condemnations were warranted and appropriate. These statements promoted classic anti-Semitic tropes about Jewish money and power. They have no place in American political discourse. The American Jewish Committee released a statement saying, "We can no longer ignore or minimize Representative Omar's pattern of anti-Semitic statements. Her tweets about Benjamins and hypnotizing the world echo centuries of dangerous anti-Jewish propaganda. Her comparison of Israel to Nazi Germany is particularly offensive to Holocaust survivors and their families." Holocaust survivors groups condemned her. Some people did something common as minimizing genocide and terrorism in ways that dishonor victims. One survivor, speaking at a press conference, said through tears, "My parents were murdered by Nazis. I came to America for safety. To hear a congresswoman minimize terrorism, to hear her compare Jews to our murderers, it breaks my heart." Muslim Americans were sharply divided, revealing fault lines within a community often portrayed as monolithically supporting progressive politicians like Omar. Many condemned her, saying she didn't represent their views and embarrassed their community. Other Muslim members of Congress, including Andre Carson and Rashida Tlaib initially, began distancing themselves from her most controversial statements. Several Muslim advocacy organizations issued statements saying they disagreed with her characterization of 9/11 and her approach to discussing Israel. However, other Muslim Americans defended her vigorously, arguing she was being unfairly targeted because of her identity. CAIR continued supporting her, though notably their statements became more carefully worded. Polling showed that even among Muslim Americans, her approval dropped from 71% to 54% after the debate, a significant decline that suggested Trump's attacks had resonated even within her base community. Minnesota politics exploded in ways that would reshape the state's political landscape. Within 72 hours of the debate, Don Samuels, a moderate Democrat and former Minneapolis City Council member, announced a primary challenge against Omar. His announcement video featured clips from the Trump debate, with Samuels saying, "Our district deserves representation that puts America first, not Somalia first. We deserve a representative who can clearly state their loyalty to this country, who honors 9/11 victims properly, who doesn't spread anti-Semitism, who doesn't funnel campaign money to family members." His first-week fundraising totaled $4.2 million, a staggering amount for a congressional primary challenger, showing how much energy Trump had generated against Omar. Polling showed him immediately competitive, with Omar's support in her own district dropping below 50% for the first time since her initial election. Other Democratic candidates began exploring runs against her. Local Minneapolis politicians who had been afraid to challenge a progressive icon now sensed vulnerability. The Minnesota Democratic Farmer-Labor Party, while not officially abandoning her, became noticeably less supportive in their public statements. Democratic leadership abandoned her more openly than ever before. Nancy Pelosi, when asked about the debate at a press conference, gave a response that was devastating in its neutrality. "Members are responsible for addressing concerns about their conduct. I can't comment on ongoing ethics matters or potential investigations." She refused to defend Omar, refused to call Trump's attacks racist, refused to provide any cover whatsoever. Chuck Schumer was even more pointed. Asked about Omar's Somalia speech, he said, "Democrats need to focus on representing American interests and American voters. That's what we're elected to do." The implication was clear. Omar had failed to do this. Other Democrats who had worked with Omar began openly criticizing her. Moderate House members gave anonymous quotes to reporters saying she was a political liability and impossible to defend. Several Democrats who had previously signed letters supporting her now claimed they had been pressured and regretted their signatures. The progressive wing still defended her publicly, but even AOC's statements became more carefully worded, focusing on opposing Islamophobia generally rather than defending Omar's specific statements. 3 months after the debate, the House Ethics Committee announced a formal investigation into Omar's campaign finance violations, specifically the payments to her husband Tim Minnett's company. The announcement was significant because Ethics Committee investigations are rare and indicated serious concerns about her conduct. The investigation would examine whether she had violated House rules, whether the payments constituted personal use of campaign funds, and whether she had properly disclosed the financial relationships. The FBI, under enormous political pressure from Congress, and with all the evidence Trump had publicized, reopened inquiries into the marriage fraud allegations that had been previously closed without charges. Federal prosecutors in Minnesota were assigned to review the evidence, including the school records, family photos, social media posts, and tax filings. Immigration and Customs Enforcement announced it was cooperating with the investigation to determine if immigration fraud had occurred. Minnesota state authorities announced reviews of her tax filings related to the period when she was apparently filing jointly with Ahmed Hiasi while legally married to Ahmed Elmi. State prosecutors indicated that if tax fraud was found, state charges could be brought regardless of any federal investigation. 6 months after the debate, in a move that stunned political observers, Ilhan Omar announced she would not seek re-election to Congress. Her statement claimed she wanted to focus on advocacy work and spend more time with family, but political analysts universally recognized this as forced retirement. She couldn't survive a primary after Trump's evisceration and continuing faced ethics investigations, possible FBI charges, and complete loss of credibility. Behind the scenes, Democratic leadership had strongly encouraged her to step aside, making clear they wouldn't support her re-election campaign and couldn't protect her from investigations anymore. The message was clear: leave voluntarily or be pushed out through investigations, expulsion votes, or primary defeat. Her withdrawal statement was defiant in tone but defeated in substance. She claimed she was being forced out by racism and Islamophobia, but she couldn't explain away the evidence Trump had presented. She couldn't deny the marriage records, the school records, the family photos, the campaign finance payments, the congressional resolutions condemning her anti-Semitism, or her own recorded words minimizing 9/11. Trump himself experienced a significant surge in support from voters who appreciated him asking questions the media wouldn't, confronting issues others were afraid to touch, and using evidence rather than just rhetoric. His approval rating among voters concerned about immigration rose to 61%, his highest mark in that demographic. His support among Jewish voters increased notably, with some polls showing movement of 8–10 points in his direction. Even some moderate Democrats and independents who disliked Trump's style admitted he had raised legitimate concerns about Omar that deserved investigation. His willingness to confront Omar directly with evidence on issues others were afraid to address made him appear courageous rather than bigoted, precisely because he had used documents and her own statements rather than just insults. He had proven that evidence defeats victimhood, that documentation beats deflection, and that confronting controversial issues with facts can change public opinion even in polarized times. 1 year after the debate, Ilhan Omar had effectively disappeared from national politics. The woman who had been a squad superstar, a progressive icon, a fundraising powerhouse for left-wing causes, was now remembered primarily for the scandals Trump had exposed: possible brother marriage fraud, 9/11 minimization, condemned anti-Semitism, campaign finance corruption, and questionable loyalty to America. Some on the left still defended her as a victim of Islamophobia, but even many progressives acknowledged she had made indefensible statements and engaged in questionable practices. The broader public had moved decisively against her, viewing her as someone who had exploited America's generosity, committed possible crimes, and then claimed victimhood when held accountable. This wasn't a debate about policy or ideology in any traditional sense. This was a confrontation between evidence and victimhood, between documentation and deflection, between someone who had built a political career on enforcing immigration law and someone accused of violating that very law. It was about whether identity politics could shield someone from accountability when faced with overwhelming evidence of wrongdoing. For years, Ilhan Omar had perfected a defensive strategy that worked remarkably well in modern American politics. Use identity as a shield. Any question about her marriages was dismissed as Islamophobia. Any criticism of her 9/11 comments was called racism. Any concern about her loyalty was labeled bigotry. Any investigation into her finances was characterized as persecution of a Muslim woman. The strategy was brilliant in its simplicity and effectiveness. It worked because media outlets and politicians were terrified of being called bigots, so they didn't ask hard questions or demand answers. They accepted her characterization of any scrutiny as prejudice and moved on. Trump didn't care about being called racist or Islamophobic. He had been called worse by better people. He had faced accusations of bigotry for years and emerged politically stronger each time. The names didn't hurt him. His base didn't believe them. His opponents had overused such accusations to the point where they had lost much of their power. So when Omar deployed her standard defense, calling his questions Islamophobic, Trump was completely immune. The shield that had protected her for years shattered against someone who simply didn't care about the names she called him. More importantly, Trump brought evidence. Real, documented, official evidence that couldn't be dismissed as conspiracy theories or fabrications. Marriage certificates with official government seals. School records from Somalia showing matched parent names. Family photos clearly showing Omar and Elmi as children in the same household. Social media posts from family members calling Elmi her brother, archived before they were deleted. Tax records showing joint filings with two different men. Minnesota Campaign Finance Board fine documentation, FEC complaints, congressional resolutions, video footage of her own words. Campaign Finance reports detailing payments to her husband's company. Every allegation was backed by documentation. Every question was based on official records. Every attack referenced her own statements or publicly available evidence. She couldn't dismiss it as racist fabrication when he was holding up official documents with government seals. She couldn't call it conspiracy theory when he was playing video of her own words. She couldn't claim it was Islamophobic persecution when he was showing congressional resolutions that her own Democratic colleagues had passed condemning her. Brother marriage allegations, dismissed for years as debunked conspiracy theories, were suddenly taken seriously when Trump presented the school records showing the same parents, the family photos showing them as children together, and most devastatingly, Omar's own refusal to simply deny the allegations. When asked directly, "Is he your brother?" she couldn't say no. She deflected, attacked, claimed persecution, but she never gave the simple denial that would have ended the controversy if it were false. Her silence spoke volumes. Her evasion confirmed suspicions. The evidence Trump presented forced mainstream media to finally acknowledge these were legitimate questions deserving investigation. Some people did something comment about 9/11, which she had defended, and her allies had explained away as taken out of context, was played in full context, showing exactly the contempt Trump accused her of. She had indeed minimized the worst attack on American soil, reducing 2,977 murders to a casual phrase used to make a political point about Muslim civil rights. No amount of claiming misunderstanding could erase those words or the tone in which she delivered them. No amount of spin could explain away the fact that she had never properly apologized or shown adequate respect for the victims. Trump reading the names of victims, showing their photos, describing their deaths in detail while she sat silently was devastating television that showed the human cost of her cavalier language. Her anti-Semitism, condemned twice by her own party in official House resolutions, couldn't be spun as mere criticism of Israel when Trump displayed the tweets themselves. It's all about the Benjamins, and Israel has hypnotized the world, were classic anti-Semitic tropes that accused Jews of using money to control politics and possessing mystical powers to manipulate Gentiles. These weren't policy disagreements. These were bigoted stereotypes that had fueled persecution of Jews for centuries. When even her own Democratic colleagues had felt compelled to pass two separate resolutions condemning her within months, the anti-Semitism was undeniable. The $2.8 million in payments to her husband's company, documented in official campaign finance reports, showed corruption regardless of whether the payments were technically legal. She was enriching her family with donor money, funneling millions to her husband's business, having married him shortly after both their divorces that ended marriages torn apart by their affair. The Minnesota fine she paid for campaign finance violations proved she had already been found to have broken rules. The pattern was clear. Use campaign donations as a personal bank account to enrich her household. Her Somalia speech, where she told a Somali audience to ask us what country we are from, instead of simply stating she was American, raised fundamental questions about loyalty that identity politics couldn't answer. She had been given the perfect opportunity to clearly state her allegiance to America, to say, "I am an American representing America." And instead she had spoken as a Somali to Somalis about Somali interests with the passion of someone advocating for her true home country. Trump's question, "What country are you from?" hung unanswered because she couldn't give the answer Americans wanted to hear. Trump proved that evidence defeats victimhood. Documentation beats deflection. When you present actual facts, marriage records, congressional resolutions, campaign finance reports, video footage, the Islamophobia shield shatters. When you show official documents, the conspiracy theory defense fails. When you play someone's own recorded words, the taken out of context excuse falls apart. When you ask simple, direct questions and receive only evasion, the silence becomes its own answer. The debate demonstrated that in an era of identity politics where accusations of bigotry have enormous power, someone willing to ignore those accusations and focus relentlessly on evidence can still prevail. Trump showed that if you have documentation, if you have official records, if you have their own words on video, and if you're willing to endure being called racist, you can hold even protected progressive politicians accountable for their actions. If you think Ilhan Omar should face consequences for possible immigration fraud, share this story with everyone you know. Comment, investigate Omar, if you believe the brother marriage allegations deserve thorough FBI investigation. If you think some people did something, comment, showed disrespect for 9/11 victims. Share this to remind people of what she said. If you believe her anti-Semitism has no place in Congress, spread this story to show what Trump exposed. If you think campaign finance corruption should be prosecuted regardless of the politician's identity, share this to demand equal justice. Because Trump asked the questions establishment media wouldn't ask. He presented evidence they had buried. He demanded answers they had accepted excuses for. And Ilhan Omar, protected for years by claims of victimhood, finally faced accountability when confronted with documentation she couldn't deny, questions she couldn't answer, and someone who wouldn't be silenced by accusations of bigotry. The evidence is public. The marriage records exist. The school records are real. The family photos are authentic. The social media posts are archived. The campaign finance payments are documented. The congressional resolutions condemning her are official record. Her own words minimizing 9/11 are on video. The questions Trump asked are legitimate, and Omar's refusal to answer them, her inability to explain the evidence, her reliance on calling critics racist rather than providing documentation, tells us everything we need to know. America gave her everything when Somalia had nothing to offer. America saved her from violence, starvation, and chaos. America provided safety, citizenship, opportunity, and even elected her to Congress. And according to the evidence Trump presented, she possibly repaid that generosity with fraud, with contempt, with corruption, with hatred, and with loyalty to another country. That's not just political scandal. That's betrayal of the nation that rescued her. That's why Trump's final question resonated so powerfully. Maybe Somalia needs you more than America does.